Hello everyone and welcome to Sri Ram's IAS. This is me Sanadat Bhardwaj bringing to you a very important video for the day because we will be talking about revolution. Guys, हम youthful stage पे हैं, हम India itself is a young nation. Apart from that, if you talk about everybody around you, young aspirants around you, right? You're preparing for UPSC Civil Services examination. ऐसे ही पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के अंदर भी एक यूथफुल स्टेज आई थी. देयर वाज अ पॉइंट इन टाइम वेयर रेवोल्यूशन, वेयर रिफॉर्म फाउंड इट्स प्लेस. नाउ इन दिस वीडियो लेक्चर, apart from what is the definition, what is the meaning, scope and evolution of the subject, I want to take you to the current and the most vibrant aspect of the subject. And that is where reform took place. That is where revolution took place in this particular subject. And that is the revolution or the reform of new public administration. Today we are going to discuss this topic and we are going to have a very critical perspective about this revolution. We are going to see how this reform culminated and किस तरीके से ये evolve हुआ, what were the reasons, what were the challenges that new public administration wanted to address, why it happened, how it happened and what were the consequences beyond that stage. तो चलिए शुरुआत करते हैं, देखते हैं हम क्या क्या चीजें कवर करेंगे. सबसे पहली चीज, द वेरी फर्स्ट थिंग दैट वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड इज द बेसिक आस्पेक्ट, द आइडिया दैट न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन was not just public administration in a fresh perspective. It was a revolution. And this revolution was not a one day's task. ये आज एक दिन में नहीं हुआ, इसको लाने में कई दशक लग गए. It took decades to reach this stage. And this particular zone of public administration, how it came into being. There was a time, let's take a walk through history. There was a time in 1940s where World War was being, fought. Because World War was being fought, everybody around the world, except India, of course, because India was still trying to fight for its own independence. See, when you read and study public administration, you will have to understand that this subject or the concepts of this subject particularly, they have been written from a Western perspective. And that is why in your paper 2 syllabus, you understand the Indian perspective of this subject. So what we need to understand is कि किस तरीके से history के अंदर न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन इवॉल्व हुआ. एंड न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन का टाइम पीरियड लेट 1960s का, बट आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट 1940s. Somewhere around 30 odd years before that. Somewhere around 30 odd years before that, a war was being fought around the world. Let's keep India out of it. Do not. Otherwise, whenever anything happens in my classes, you would realize I would always talk about India. Here, I don't want to talk about India because this is something that did not impact India. Why? India was still under British rule. Now, understanding the perspective of new public administration, historical perspective, if you understand this phenomena, you would never fail to understand any single concept in the field and in the subject of public administration. Once you realize that everything happened for a reason. There were reasons for new public administration as well. Some I have enlisted here. This is for your ready reference, but hear me out first before reading through the presentation and before asking me, sir, who is this guy? I would talk about this guy as well. I have kept the picture for a purpose, right? He was the dark horse. He was the one who brought this revolution. I'll talk about him. His name is Dwight Waldo. Dwight Waldo. Let me change the color. I hope it's visible to you guys. Yup, Dwight Waldo. Now, we were talking about 1940s. Just hear me out. Just focus on me, guys. 1940s, World War, the Second World War was being fought. Imagine if you had war being fought around you. For example, if you were still in Russia, if you're Russians, imagine your country is at war with some other country, for example. Imagine you are in US when US invaded Iraq, when US invaded Afghanistan. Now, when you are someone whose country is actually at war with other countries, or you are in that zone, a sense of nationalism comes in play. And that sense of nationalism tends to loosen up the rights. Now, the society tends to loosen up the rights and it tends to give away those rights. The society no longer remains a right-based society, it becomes a duty-based society. It tends to loosen up those rights. It tends to have hope in the governments. It tends to focus and allow the government or give or shift the locus of power towards the government. सरकारों को और ज़्यादा powers दे देते हैं. And that is what happened in 1940s and 1950s. Because of the world wars and because those world wars were fought and won by the major Western powers, people started to have faith in those governments. People thought कि नहीं भैया, this government is going to help us. This government would do something good, would do something better for us. Maybe not today. We are coming out of the war zone. We are coming out of that zone, this period of war. शायद आगे आने वाले समय में कुछ सुधार हो जाएगा. और यही हुआ. जो पुरानी जनरेशंस थी 1940s के अंदर, 1950s के अंदर, they started having faith in the governments, and those faithful governments, or those governments which had gained more powers from the public, they came out to be known as hope governments, because you guys had hope in those governments. But then times changed. Then came the era where new generation came into being. New generation said, this is not enough. The governments are not doing enough. They started asking questions. These questions that they started asking, they started demanding back those rights that were given away by the previous generations, और उसे हमने कहना शुरू कर दिया NRP, New Rights Philosophy. I'm just giving you the keywords that you can look up later on, and also if you follow these lectures throughout, अगर आप इन lecture series को throughout follow करते हैं, हमारे इन सेशंस को फॉलो करते हैं, तो ये सारे सवालों के जवाब, all these questions will be answered within the class. But these are small breadcrumbs. I like to play with the minds of UPSC aspirants. What I like to do is to give them certain food for thought. शरीर बड़ा है, खाने का शौक है, तो लोगों को भी खाना खिलाता हूं. तो आपके माइंड को कुछ खाना खिलाना चाहता हूं. Just try to find out what is hope government or what is new rights philosophy. Now, pulling us back into the field of public administration. Public administration की field के अंदर वापस से कुछ thinkers आए. Thinkers ने कहा कि this is not right. Whatever is happening, the field of public administration or the study of public administration or the people of public administration cannot sit around and wait for the world to sort everything else. We should have a part to play. This was the revolutionary idea. And this revolutionary idea actually started to form or to take shape through this process where they started asking questions from the hope governments. This questioning led to the formation of this philosophy called the New Rights Philosophy, where the young generation wanted to seek their rights back from the governments. It also led to one more thing, and that was a approach called as the pluralistic approach. Pluralistic approach. Now, pluralistic approach is basically talking about how any single individual would seek rights from the government. और किसी भी तरीके से सरकारों से अपने अधिकारों की डिमांड करेंगे तो कैसे करेंगे? Everybody has their specific interests. और वो सिमिलर इंटरेस्ट्स वाले लोग सिमिलैरिटी के साथ आपस में जुड़ते हैं एंड दीज प्लूरल इंटरेस्ट्स आर सॉट आफ्टर फ्रॉम द गवर्नमेंट। और जिसका बोल बाला होता है, जिसकी लाठी उसकी भैंस, फॉर एग्जाम्पल। सो whoever had the strongest arm would seek their own rights, and that is why pluralistic approach is basically a survival of the fittest in the political arena, right? So this pluralistic approach came into being. That was the initial phase of this reformative, or I would say the revolutionary aspects of political science and public administration. Now, when you talk about new public administration, this was not an abrupt phenomena. ये चला आ रहा था. This was a prolonged, a multiple decade long revolution that took place, and उसका culmination point, उसका point of emergence हुआ at the Minno-Brooks Conference of 1968. This month, this year, you shall have to remember. मिनो ब्रुक्स कॉन्फ्रेंस, पहली मिनो ब्रुक्स कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई 1968 के अंदर, दूसरी होती है 1988 के अंदर, थर्ड होती है 2008 के अंदर. यू विल हैव टू रिमेंबर दिस. 20 years का डिफरेंस है, जस्ट लाइक द चार्टर एक्ट्स, राइट? नाउ दिस मिनो ब्रुक्स कॉन्फ्रेंस वाज नॉट द sole conference or the sole report that came into being, but still this was the last nail in the coffin of the orthodoxy or the primitive form of public administration. जिस चीज को वुड्रो विल्सन के एसे ने जन्म दिया था, अगर आपने पिछले लेक्चर्स देखे हैं मेरे, उसमें आपने ये चीज देखी भी होगी. वुड्रो विल्सन ने जिस चीज को जन्म दिया था अपने एसे के थ्रू, that thing came to an end and a new era began right at the cusp of the Minno-Brooks Conference. Now, what was being talked about? Let's start to discuss that as well. Now, first and foremost thing, I told you, Minno-Brooks Conference, हालांकि इकलौती चीज नहीं थी. It was not the sole thing that was impacting or creating or giving emergence to new public administration. इसके अलावा there was the Honey report. Apart from that, there was another conference called the Philadelphia Conference. But most of the books, they don't discuss these two reports or conferences. Reason being, they had similar things to say as Minno-Brooks Conference. Lekin Minno-Brooks Conference had more participation. There were somewhere around 33 odd thinkers who had come together, and they gave a more strong and a robust report, I would say. And there was certainty of consequences from that conference. इसी वजह से हम इन दोनों कॉन्फ्रेंसेस को ज्यादा पढ़ते नहीं, बुक्स ज्यादा मेंशन नहीं करते हैं, बट वी शैल डिस्कस दीज बिकॉज ये एक एवोल्यूशनरी स्टेज है. दीज आर बेसिकली द एवोल्यूशनरी प्रोसेसेस as to how Minno-Brooks Conference came into being. So we would discuss this, but not today, but when we discuss Minno-Brooks Conference. I just want to have a brief overview as to what Minno-Brooks Conference did for us. Minno-Brooks Conference ने 1950 और 1960 के इस एरा को, जो 1950s और 1960s का एरा, होप गवर्नमेंट्स का एरा था, उसको रेवोल्यूशनाइज करने की कोशिश की. Its main purpose was to break away from the orthodoxy of traditional public administration. अब traditional public administration क्या चीज थी? Traditional public administration welfareism से कोसों दूर थी. Traditional public administration value neutral थी, as in it was not there to add value to the lives of individuals. It was just acting as an instrument in the hands of political few. तो कोशिश क्या थी पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन की? टू एक्ट एज अ टूल, जस्ट एज अ टूल, जिसके जरिए पॉलिटिकल फिलॉसफी या पॉलिटिकल थॉट या पॉलिटिकल डिस्कोर्स को मासेस तक पहुंचाया जा सके. इट वाज मियरली दैट. एंड इस व्यू को हम इंस्ट्रूमेंटलिस्ट अप्रोच भी कहते हैं, या इंस्ट्रूमेंटलिस्ट व्यू भी कहते हैं, where public administration is merely an instrument where the political discourse or the political policies, the policies of the government, they are instrumentalized. कोई लेना देना नहीं है, bureaucratization हो रहा है. If you remember, if you have read Woodrow Wilson was inspired by Prussian system of administration. Now the Prussian system of administration, or the German system of administration is quite rigid. It is bureaucratized. और जहां जहां ब्यूरोक्रेसी स्ट्रांग होगी वहां वहां पर you will have people who are not actually involved in the sentiment of implementing the policy but merely are the vassals. जैसे vassals of God कहते हैं ना, भगवान का बाशिंदा, for example, खुदा का बंदा, right? Who is basically doing whatever the Almighty is telling him to do and is not involved in any of the activities that he is performing. Similarly, public administration was considered to be instrumentalist so that we could improve or enhance efficiency. EEE, if you remember, there used to be an exam called AIEEE which we had scored well in, but यहाँ पे मैं EEE की बात कर रहा हूँ, economy, reducing the cost of implementation, efficiency, and finally effectiveness. Now this was the major approach and the sole focus was on these two things. In fact, it was the Minno-Brooks conference which pushed the focus towards effectiveness as well. तो कोशिश क्या थी, इस मोनोटोनस, इस रट से भरी हुई ब्यूरोक्रेटाइज्ड पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के प्रोफेशन को, field of study which was purely traditional and focused on whether or not public administration is divorced from political science or whether or not it is a part of political science. इसी छोटी छोटी बातों पे जो ट्रेडिशनल लोग फंसे हुए थे उससे तोड़कर हमें वापस बाहर निकाल कर लाए कौन? ये व्यक्ति. This individual, his name is Dwight Waldo. Now this guy and many other individuals like Frank Marini, like Vincent Ostrom for example, many other 33 odd individuals, they came together in the Minno-Brooks conference और इन लोगों ने थोड़ा सा हालात जिसको कहेंगे वो बदले. And whatever was happening, be it the Vietnam War, be it the urban riots that were happening in the West, the ethnic strikes, the assassination of JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., and or the cancellation of nomination of presidential candidates like Lyndon Johnson, all these events, they were clearly pointing out, in the West, they were clearly pointing out towards one thing only. The West was passing through a very important phase, a political phase, and that phase was a radical one. That phase was a rational one. That phase was promoting, or I would say trying to gather and muster force so that it could revolutionize things. It could reform certain things, and the things that were in line, the first and few things that were in line was public administration. Public administration, which was till now value neutral, not wanting to add any value to the revolutions or reforms happening around in the world, now it was wanting to add value. The instrumental approach or the instrumental view of public administration was broken away from the guy that I was talking about, Dwight Waldo. He was the one. He took somewhere around 33 odd thinkers with him. He sat down in Minno-Brooks and they discussed how public administration should move forward. Now, there were certain major aspects, as I told you, the Honey Report on higher education for public service that happened in 1967, Philadelphia Conference 1967, Minno-Brooks Conference of 1968. अगर मैं इन दोनों की बात करूं, they were solely focused on certain aspects of public administration, but this conference, this was a stand-alone event. इसीलिए इसके ऊपर थोड़ा सा इस लेक्चर के अंदर हम ज्यादा फोकस करेंगे. because this is the one where you found a public administration to have to have been new public administration to have been given a birth or emergence. This conference took 33 young scholars, practitioners of public administration in 1968 September, right? Not as quite hot as it is in this classroom, but otherwise there were individuals apart from Dwight Waldo, as I told you, Frank Marini, George Frederickson, Joseph, and Lindblom, for example, Vincent Ostrom. This guy Vincent Ostrom is also very famous. He gave the public choice approach. We would be talking about it in the upcoming classes. आगे आने वाली classes में PCA के बारे में, public choice approach के बारे में भी हम चर्चा करेंगे. And there were certain other scholars. These are major important ones. इनके अलावा भी और काफी हुए थे. Now, this conference was the one जिसने न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में आने में हमारी मदद की. 3 ऐसी चीजें थी जो फिलाडेल्फिया कॉन्फ्रेंस में भी बोली गई थी और इस कॉन्फ्रेंस में भी बोली गई. What did these conferences talk about? They said that public administration should be value based. It should no longer be value neutral. It should be policy oriented and not be divorced from the political thought. जो policy है उसकी formulation के अंदर ताकि एक feedback loop बन सके. Because when you talk about public policy, the policy implementation agents, the public administrators, इन लोगों के पास डायरेक्ट फर्स्ट हैंड एक्सपीरियंस होता है जिन चीजों में लोगों को परेशानी आ रही. एंड व्हाट आर द इंप्लीमेंटेशन चैलेंजेस, एंड दैट इज व्हाई it said that we should be policy oriented and there should be a feedback mechanism where the policy can be revamped according to the needs of the public. Public administration should consider the environment as well. Why did it say कि इसको environment को भी consider करना होगा? The reason is that when you talk about any policy, one policy might work for US and at the same time the same policy might not work for India. Right? So it should consider as to how the environment plays out. Similarly, as I told you, जो pluralistic approach थी, जहां पर people were seeking their rights from the governments, from hope governments, the revolution that had started off in the manner of pluralistic approach and the new rights philosophy, new public administration was wanting to break away from that. कोशिश ये थी कि हम एक इंडिविजुअलिस्टिक अप्रोच लेकर आ सकें, एफिशिएंसी के साथ साथ इफेक्टिवनेस भी ला सकें. बट इन द एंड इट डिड नॉट डिनाई द प्लूरलिस्टिक अप्रोच, ऑल्दो इट वांटेड टू ब्रेक अवे फ्रॉम इट. तो कोशिश ये थी कि हम प्लूरलिस्टिक अप्रोच के साथ ना चलें, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं था कि हम प्लूरलिस्टिक अप्रोच को, उसकी एग्जिस्टेंस को मान नहीं रहे थे. It was wanting, the new public administrators, the NPA regime wanted to use the pluralistic approach. Apart from that, कोशिश ये भी थी कि हम एक तरीके से rational administration based on logic, based on reasons, उसकी कोशिश कर सकें. Right? Apart from that, it said that the final public policy should be the product of various strengths of all the lobbies and all the groups. यहीं पर public administration का जो ये नया phase था, pluralistic approach को accept कर लेता है to a certain extent. Apart from that, public administration, as per the conference, public administration should be able to respond to the environment. It should not keep on increasing its size and scope. कि ये भी करेंगे, ये भी करेंगे, ये भी करेंगे. And this one single line that I've written here, अगर आप सरकारी जुमलों को ध्यान से सुनते हैं, minimum government, maximum governance, good governance, if you are going through certain things from the newspapers and if you are reading the newspapers right, then you would remember this, that this is something that keeps on happening. This led to the emergence of the topic of good governance. भागा दौड़ी नहीं करने का ये वाला टॉपिक भी आने वाला है. I would talk about good governance as well, and just like this, in a very interactive manner, Stay tuned, make sure that you watch every session till the end. कुछ भी एक सिंगल लाइन भी मिस हो गई तो उसी एस्पेक्ट के ऊपर सवाल भी आ जाते हैं. आई हैव brought to you certain questions as well. For example, for this topic I have brought to you one question which is basically a previous year question. Now it is not always necessary कि जो एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन है उसका साइज बढ़ते जाए. कोशिश ये होनी चाहिए कि हम सारी की सारी जरूरतों को पूरा कर सकें. वी शुड केटर टू ऑल द नीड्स एंड नॉट बी एबल टू इंक्रीज द साइज. तो एफिशिएंसी एंड इफेक्टिवनेस को इंप्रूव करने की कोशिश हुई. द प्रोसेस इज नाउ रेफर टू एज अ कटबैक मैनेजमेंट प्रोसेस. New public administration wanted to move away from the way public administration was being run. It was being run on the grounds of business management. वुड्रो विल्सन साहब बिजनेस मैनेजमेंट के साथ ना बहुत अच्छे से ही वॉज वेरी मच इंस्पायर्ड. बिकॉज आप ये समझिए ट्रेडिशनल इकोनॉमिक्स के अंदर यूएसए इज वन ऑफ द मेजर कंट्रीज जो इवन आज भी, अगर आप साइक्लिकल फिस्कल पॉलिसी की बात करें, फॉर एग्जांपल इफ यू टॉक अबाउट फॉर एग्जांपल द वे कैपिटलिज्म शुड बी रन, यूएस इज एपिटमी ऑफ ऑल दीज थिंग्स. तो वो एक मेजर एग्जाम्पल है. वो आज भी है, वो उस दिन भी था, वो तब भी था. एंड दैट इज व्हाई वुड्रो विल्सन हैड बीन एक्सपेक्टिंग कि पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को इस तरीके से रन करो जैसे बिजनेस एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन रन होता है. द अफेयर्स ऑफ पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन शुड बी टू अ सर्टेन एक्सटेंट बिजनेस लाइक, बट दे आर नॉट बिजनेस. ऐसा कहा भी है, आई एम जस्ट पैराफ्रेजिंग. मतलब कि हालांकि पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के अंदर पब्लिक पॉलिसी आ जाती है, देयर इज पब्लिक पॉलिसी इन पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, बट स्टिल यू शुड इम्बाइब द बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस फ्रॉम बिजनेस एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एज वेल. ये बात बोली गई. ठीक है जी. अच्छा, इस बात को समझते हुए न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन ने, बिकॉज वुड्रो विल्सन साहब ने कुछ एसेज निकाले, कुछ राइटअप्स निकाले थे, न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन पीछे नहीं हटी. उन्होंने भी मेजर two major publications निकाली towards a new public administration. The Minnow Brooks Perspective by Frank Marini, ये 1971 के अंदर पब्लिश हुआ. Dwight Waldo ने भी 1971 के अंदर Public Administration in the Times of Turbulence इस publication को रिलीज किया. And these two publications brought to the world the ways and means of NPA. When I say NPA, NPA is New Public Administration. ठीक है जी. नाउ द आइडियाज एंड द व्यूज एंड द फिलोसफीज ऑफ मिनो ब्रुक्स कॉन्फ्रेंस, वो सब की सब इन दोनों बुक्स के अंदर तहे दिल से आ चुकी थी. नाउ व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, हमने हिस्ट्री समझ ली, हमने प्रोसेस समझ लिया, हमने जिसको कहते हैं ना, हम रग से वाकिफ हो गए. वी हैव अंडरस्टूड हाउ इट मूव्स. But we need to understand the structure of new public administration. You cannot answer UPSC mains questions on just feels. You have felt the topic now. आपको समझ में आ गया, आपको फील हो गया. लेकिन एक चीज जरूरी है और वो है fillers. How would you write the answers? And for that, you need to know 4 important goals of new public administration. One is relevance. What does relevance mean? Relevance means that public administration should not be aloof of the political few, and it should not be aloof of those individuals for whom they are implementing the policy. तो public administration को एक link बनना है. It should be relevant. It should not lose its social context. Number 1. Number 2, it should use tools and techniques so that it can solve social problems. It should not merely be a tool, it should not merely be a technique, but those tools and techniques वो इन्हीं सामाजिक मुद्दों को सुलझाने के लिए जरूरी हैं. Now if you compare it with India, I told you we would not talk about India. I know I'm breaking my promise, but try to understand this. This evolution took place somewhere around in 1968, 1970, है ना. 1968 हुआ एंड 1970. 1968-1970 में ये चीजें हुई. इंडिया वॉज फाइटिंग वॉर्स. बांग्लादेश की साइड 1971 फॉर एग्जाम्पल, है ना, एंड चाइना के साथ वॉर हो रही थी, पाकिस्तान के साथ वॉर्स हो रही थी. बट इफ यू कंसिडर India was already working on these grounds. Our public administration or our system of governance was based on solving social problems. It was based out of relevance without any reference, बिना किसी linkage या reference के towards NPA. We were still working on those grounds. Reason, NPA होते हुए भी वेस्ट के अंदर था भी, हमारे लिए रेलिवेंट नहीं था, लेकिन फिर भी हम न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के प्रिंसिपल्स को फॉलो कर रहे थे. हाउ? द रीजन इज दैट व्हेन यू आर इन अ डेवलपिंग वर्ल्ड, आप जब डेवलपिंग वर्ल्ड के अंदर होते हैं वहां पर कॉम्प्लेक्सिटीज डिफरेंट होती हैं. द वर्ल्ड इज डिफरेंट, द पॉलिटिकल आइडियोलॉजीज आर डिफरेंट एंड द वे societies have evolved, it is different. India had always been a social democracy. अगर आप certain ways में देखेंगे, पंचायती राज institutions, the way it existed, I would not talk about the constitutional amendments. उसकी चर्चा अलग से करेंगे 73rd, 74th amendment की. किंतु let's talk about the fact that you had ग्राम सभा even during the ancient times. Social democracy exist करती थी भाई. It already existed. And that is why principles of NPA, you will find similarities in Indian administration, but new public administration was one movement in the West where India was not party to. All right, so new public administration brought public administration closer and more relevant to general public. Apart from that, another important goal that NPA had to deliver on was values. वैल्यू न्यूट्रलिटी पे चल रही थी पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. नाउ वैल्यू न्यूट्रल को रिजेक्ट करके, ऑर्थोडॉक्स पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को रिजेक्ट करके, वी वांटेड पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन टू फोकस मोर ऑन द पब्लिक, लेस डिस्क्रिप्टिव एंड मोर प्रिस्क्रिप्टिव. व्हाट इज द डिफरेंस? सिंपल वर्ड्स में, डिस्क्रिप्शन इज, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, हियर इज अ स्लाइड, राइट? This is the screen. If I keep reading whatever has been written, descriptive. Whatever I am doing right now is prescriptive. I am telling you how to perceive this. There is a major difference. Reading through the slides and reading out the slides. दोनों में फर्क हो गया. ठीक है जी? And apart from that, you would have to bring social equity. समाज में सुधार लाना है तो सोशल इक्विटी के ऊपर भी फोकस करना पड़ेगा. एंड फॉर दैट रीजन, फॉर ब्रिंगिंग दिस सोशल इक्विटी, यू विल हैव टू ब्रिंग अबाउट चेंज. दीज वर द 4 मेजर गोल्स ऑफ न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को यहां पर समझते हुए वी वुड कम टू द पॉइंट वेयर वी वुड डिस्कस द क्वेश्चन. एक क्वेश्चन डिस्कस करते हैं. इतना समझ लिया तो आगे से इस क्लास को समझने के लिए, एक पर्सपेक्टिव गैदर करने के लिए, वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट शुड बी आवर अप्रोच इन राइटिंग द आंसर्स. सो हियर इज वन क्वेश्चन. न्यू पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन may have neither been the savior its enthusiasts promised nor the devil its critics worried it would be. Discuss. कि करने को बहुत कुछ हुआ लेकिन कुछ करके नहीं गया. डिस्कस करना है. Try writing this answer. Discuss that answer with us in the comment section and try to muster as much wisdom, as much knowledge as you can, because in the end I would end this session by saying, by knowledge we approach God. आप देख रहे हैं श्री राम IAS की तरफ से बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट सेशंस ऑन पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. Stay tuned for many more. Take care. God bless you all. Bye bye.